Okay, let's just dive right into it. Imagine waking up one morning, right? And the news is that Harvard University,
that Harvard suddenly can't enroll international students anymore.
their certification just revoked.
Just like that, overnight. And, thousands of students suddenly facing real uncertainty about their future. This wasn't ages ago. This was, May 2025?
Yeah.
Very recent.
Incredibly recent. And it was such a swift move, unprecedented, frankly. It sent massive shockwaves, through academia, created immediate chaos for so many students.
Exactly. So welcome, everyone, to this deep dive. You brought us this whole stack of sources, articles, notes, research covering these really significant, rapid-fire U.S. policy moves affecting international students. And this whole Harvard situation is right smack in the middle.
That's right. The sources give us a pretty comprehensive picture. We've got executive summaries, detailed blow-by-blows of the Harvard action, broader policy stuff, reactions from, everyone.
All the stakeholders. Yeah, and some analysis, too, about motivations, what might happen next. It specifically covers events right up to May 28th, 2025. So that's our cutoff point for this info.
And our mission here, yours and mine, is to unpack all of this. We need to get past the headlines, understand the stated reasons why the administration said they did this, to look at the fallout, immediate, maybe long-term, and just figure out what it all means.
Right.
For international students, for U.S. universities, the whole global academic scene, really. We're just laying out the information as it's presented in your sources. No spin, just the facts as reported.
Precisely. Think of it as me sharing the details from these documents, the findings, and you're guiding us, highlighting maybe the most intriguing points, making sure we cover it all impartially.
Sounds like a plan. Now, these intense things in May, they didn't just pop up out of the blue, did they? The sources kind of hint there was a buildup earlier in 2025.
They do. The documents mention that, the administration had already taken some steps earlier in the year, things targeting international students, even hitting university funding in some ways. So there was this sense already that a more assertive federal stance was emerging.
Okay, so the stage was sort of set, and then bam, May 2025 hits with two really big moves, almost back-to-back, highlighted in your sources.
Yes, exactly. The two major things were, first, the Department of Homeland Security action against Harvard. That was May 22nd.
Okay.
And then very quickly after, May 27th, a big move from the State Department affecting visa interviews worldwide.
And the sources describe these together as really signaling that more assertive federal stance.
Which is a crucial takeaway, I think. It suggests these probably weren't just isolated incidents, more like part of a bigger, maybe a coordinated strategy from the administration.
Okay, let's zoom in on that Harvard case first, the SEVP revocation. What exactly did DHS do on May 22nd?
So on May 22nd, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, they formally revoked Harvard's certification under the Student and Exchange Visitor Program, SEVP.
SEVP.
Right.
And just remind us, why is that SEVP certification so vital for a university like Harvard?
Oh, it's absolutely critical, indispensable, really. SEVP certification is the federal green light that lets a U.S. school legally enroll non-immigrant students. We're talking F visas, J visas.
So most international students.
Pretty much, yeah. The vast majority. Without that certification, a university simply cannot bring in or even keep those students. Legally.
So what happened the second that certification got pulled? According to the sources, what was the immediate fallout?
The sources describe it as pretty dramatic, instant impact. Harvard couldn't enroll any new international students, effective immediately.
Wow.
And maybe even more jarring, those nearly 7,000 current international students, that's like over a quarter of their whole student body, they were suddenly facing this awful choice. Scramble to transfer to another certified school or potentially have to leave the U.S. altogether just to stay legal.
That's where we start hearing about the human side, the student reactions you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. The sources picked up quotes, students calling it disarray, pure panic. One student literally said, I don't know what I'll do, but my future doesn't appear to be here. Really brings it home,
Yeah, it does. Okay, so why? Why did DHS say they did this? What was the official line from Secretary Christine Noan?
According to the DHS press release and, other official statements cited in these documents, they gave a few key reasons. First, they alleged Harvard was fostering an unsafe campus environment.
Unsafe how?
By allowing, and this is their term, anti-American pro-terrorist agitators to harass or assault Jewish students. That was the claim.
Okay, that's a very serious charge.
Very. Second, the administration claimed there was purported coordination between Harvard and the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP.
What kind of coordination?
Specifically, allegations that Harvard hosted and even trained members of the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, the XPCC, as recently as 2024. And the key thing there is the XPCC was already sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury.
Okay. So that's significant. And was there a third reason?
Yes. The third main reason given was Harvard's supposed failure to comply with simple reporting requirements. This points back to a specific demand DHS Secretary Noan made on April 16, 2025.
What was that demand?
They wanted extensive information on foreign students who might have been involved in campus violence or protests.
And the sources mentioned Harvard's president, Alan Garber, had a position on that before the revocation happened?
Yes, President Garber had put out a statement saying the university wouldn't compromise its core legally protected principles under threat. So according to DHS, when Harvard responded to that April 16th demand, which DHS called only partial compliance, they deemed it insufficient.
Okay. And there was that one detail in the DHS press release that really stood out, felt like a signal flare.
There was. It wasn't subtle. The DHS release explicitly framed the action against Harvard as, quote, a warning to all universities and academic institutions across the country.
A warning. And for you, listening, why is that specific detail, calling it a warning? Why is that so important to grasp?
It's crucial because it immediately widened the lens, right? It suggested this wasn't just about Harvard's specific alleged issues. It could be part of a bigger play by the administration.
Like what?
Like maybe asserting more control, enforcing compliance, or just signaling new expectations for all universities regarding international students, campus climate, things like that. It essentially put every college and university on notice.
Okay, given how serious that action was and that explicit warning, it's maybe not surprising Harvard pushed back. The sources say they went to court fast.
They did, incredibly fast. The very next day, May 23rd, 2025, Harvard's filed a federal lawsuit directly challenging the DHS decision.
And how did they describe the DHS action in that lawsuit, based on the sources?
Harvard called it unlawful, retaliatory, unconstitutional. Their filing argued it was clear retaliation, specifically because Harvard hadn't fully complied with what they termed ideologically rooted policy demands from the administration.
Do they cite specific legal reasons?
Yes. The lawsuit claimed DHS violated the First Amendment freedom of speech, association, dissolution, the Fifth Amendment's due process clause, and also the Administrative Procedure Act, the APA. That's the law governing how federal agencies make rules. Right. Their argument was basically the grounds were inadequate, they had no real chance to respond, and the whole action was arbitrary and capricious. That's the legal term.
So Harvard files the suit. What happened right after that?
It moved incredibly quickly. Later that same day, May 23rd, a federal judge, U.S. District Judge Allison D. Burroughs, she looked at Harvard's emergency request and granted a temporary restraining order, a TRO.
A TRO? What did that do immediately?
It stopped DHS in its tracks, blocked them from enforcing the SEVP revocation. It basically hit the pause button, preserved the status quo, meaning Harvard could, for the moment, keep enrolling new international students. And crucially, those nearly 7,000 existing students weren't immediately facing deportation or transfer. Their status was safe, at least while the TRO was active.
And what was the judge's reasoning for granting it so quickly?
Judge Burroughs stated it was needed to prevent immediate and irreparable injury harm to both the university and its students before the court could have a proper hearing on the whole thing.
Okay, so where did things stand legally as of May 28th, 2025? That's the end point for your sources.
Right. So the TRO was just temporary, as the name implies. A hearing was scheduled for the very next day, May 29th. This hearing was for a preliminary injunction.
Which would be longer lasting.
Potentially, yes. It would decide if the block on the revocation should stay in place for the entire duration of the lawsuit, which could take months, even years.
And do we know what happened at that May 29th hearing from these sources?
Unfortunately, no. The information we have cuts off on May 28th. So the outcome of that really crucial hearing wasn't available in these documents. The situation was still very much up in the air.
So for you listening, why does this specific legal fight matter beyond just Harvard?
Because it's really shaping up to be a major test case. It could set big legal precedents about how much power DHS actually has over universities' ability to host international students, and, just as importantly, how universities can legally fight back if they think the government is overreaching or acting for, say, political reasons. It adds this whole layer of legal uncertainty hanging over international education in the U.S. right now.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly, because while this Harvard drama was unfolding, the administration also made a much broader move, didn't they? Something affecting all potential international students.
Yes, that was the other major development the sources picked up. On May 27, 2025, the U.S. State Department issued a new directive.
And what did that directive do?
It ordered a global pause on scheduling new visa interviews, specifically for F, M, and J visa applicants, so students and exchange visitors. The cable ordering this was signed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
A global pause on scheduling new interviews. What reason did they give for that?
The official rationale was, quote, in preparation for an expansion of required social media screening and vetting. They did say it was temporary, and the sources noted that if you already had an appointment scheduled, you could still go, but no new ones could be booked for a while.
Even temporary, what kind of problems does a sudden pause like that cause? Especially for students trying to plan.
Oh, it creates huge disruption and anxiety. Think about students applying for the summer or fall 2025 terms. Suddenly, they can't even book an interview slot. It means uncertainty, delays.
Backlogs.
Huge potential backlogs down the road, absolutely. Plus, just immense financial and emotional strain on applicants and their families. The sources specifically flagged that countries sending large numbers of students, like India, could get hit disproportionately hard by this.
And the core reason given was preparing for this expanded social media vetting.
Exactly. The pause was explicitly to give the State Department time to gear up for implementing a much broader, more systematic review of applicants' online activity as part of the visa check.
What do the sources tell us about what this expanded vetting might actually look like?
Well, the full public details weren't out yet as of May 28th, but the sources indicated it's expected to be more formalized, systematic, and potentially more intrusive than past checks, which were often more targeted.
Intrusive how? What would they be looking for?
It's anticipated they'll be screening for things like content suggesting support for terrorism, obviously, but also expressions of anti-Semitism, or even just attitudes deemed hostile to U.S. culture, government, or institutions.
Wow, that sounds like it could raise some serious concerns. Did the sources mention any immediate reactions?
They did, right away. Immigration lawyers, advocacy groups, they all voiced concerns pretty quickly. Things like, how subjective is this going to be? What are the actual criteria? Who decides what's hostile?
And the impact on free speech.
Exactly. A major concern is the potential chilling effect. Will applicants start self-censoring online, afraid that something innocent could be misinterpreted? The sources noted NAFSA, that's the big International Education Association, started advising students to be really careful about their digital footprint.
What about the practical side? What does implementing something like this mean for the visa process itself, even after the pause ends?
Well, the sources point out it's definitely going to increase the workload for consular officers at embassies. Massively, which almost certainly means slower processing times overall.
So more delays.
Likely, yeah. Even beyond the temporary pause, you could see sustained bottlenecks. The State Department's own cable acknowledged this vetting expansion would have potentially significant implications for consular section operations. And if the guidelines aren't crystal clear and transparent, there's a real worry about arbitrary or inconsistent decisions being made.
Okay. You mentioned earlier this wasn't all happening in isolation, that it was part of an evolving pattern. Can you connect these May actions back to some of those earlier things from spring or January 2025 that the sources noted?
Sure. The sources definitely paint a picture of increasing scrutiny on international students throughout 2025. Earlier in the spring, for example, there were actions that led to thousands of students already here temporarily losing their status. Many got it back. But still, the grounds for termination were broadened.
And before that?
January. Yeah, back around January 2025, there was a series of executive orders. These mandated enhanced vetting, called for more scrutiny of people from certain countries deemed high risk, and explicitly told agency secretaries to make sure universities were monitoring and reporting alien students and staff their term who might show hostile attitudes.
And wasn't there a financial pressure angle mentioned too?
Yes, absolutely. The administration also used financial levers. Sources noted examples of freezing or cutting federal research funds to universities, sometimes linking it to things like campus anti-Semitism concerns or DEI policies or alleged discrimination.
Like a Harvard grant cut.
Exactly. That $2.7 million DHS grant termination for Harvard in April 2025, just weeks before the SEVP action, was cited as a prime example of that financial pressure tactic.
And FWD.US, that nonprofit group, they had a description for the overall effect of all these policies combined.
They did. They characterized the cumulative impact of all these different actions as creating a chaotic and fearful environment for international students and scholars in the U.S. Their argument was that this really undermines the stability and predictability people need for study and research.
So connecting these dots for you, the listener, these May actions, they aren't really standalone events.
Yep. Exactly. The sources show they fit into this broader pattern: increased scrutiny of foreign nationals, more willingness by the administration to intervene in how universities operate, and definitely viewing international engagement through what the sources often call an America First perspective.
Makes sense. Okay, so how did people react to all this, both here in the U.S. and globally? Let's start with Harvard again.
Well, the impact on the Harvard students and the university itself was, like we said, just immediate and deep. That disarray, that pure panic for those nearly 7,000 students, it was real. These aren't just numbers. They're people doing research, teaching, part of the community.
And Harvard's official statements.
Harvard, as the sources capture, called the DHS move retaliatory action, said it threatened serious harm, undermined their whole academic mission. They put it very bluntly. Without its international students, Harvard is not Harvard.
Were student reactions all the same, or was there some variation? Mostly negative, I assume.
Largely negative, yes. Many student groups, like the Harvard College Democrats mentioned in the sources, strongly condemned it as political, an attack on free speech. But the sources did note a small segment, some students identifying as Trump supporters, reportedly felt the government was within its rights. But for the vast majority affected, it was just massive disruption to their lives, their degrees, their futures.
What about the rest of the U.S. higher education world? How did they respond?
There was a very strong and pretty unified backlash from the major U.S. higher ed organizations. Ted Mitchell, head of the American Council on Education, ACE, a big umbrella group, he publicly called the Harvard action illegal, small-minded overreach. He warned it would have a very chilling effect everywhere.
And NAFSA, the International Education Specialists.
NAFSA was extremely critical. They talked about the threat to America's global standing, the economy, losing talent. Fanta Ah, their CEO, specifically called the social media vetting plan very problematic and stressed that international students are assets, not liabilities.
You mentioned FWD.US earlier, too.
Yeah, FWD.US kept hammering on the potential for job losses, economic harm, weakening U.S. competitiveness by driving talent away. They stuck with that description of the climate as chaotic and fearful.
Even free speech groups got involved.
Yes, Fire Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, they weighed in too. They criticized the demands for student info as trying to create a campus surveillance state and actually praised Harvard for taking the government to court over it.
So what does this strong critical reaction within the U.S. academic community tell you, the listener?
It really shows a broad consensus among these key groups. They largely see these policies as harmful overreach, damaging U.S. interests in the long run. They're framing their opposition as defending academic freedom and the value of global engagement against what they see as political moves.
But this wasn't just a U.S. story. The ripples went global. What did the sources say about reactions in Asia?
In Asia, it was interesting. Some universities and even governments seemed to see an opening. In Hong Kong, for instance, places like HKREST put out open invitations to Harvard students affected by this, offering fast-track admission, support.
Really? Actively recruiting them?
Yeah, and the sources said this was apparently encouraged by Hong Kong authorities. Other universities there did similar things.
What about China's official stance?
The Chinese Foreign Ministry criticized the U.S. actions, said it would damage its own image, and they repeated their usual line opposing the politicization of education.
Japan also seemed interested in attracting students.
Yes. The Japanese government reportedly encouraged its top universities, like Tokyo University, to think about supporting students impacted by U.S. policies. This fits with Japan's own efforts lately to ease visa rules and attract more international talent anyway.
And India, big source of U.S. students.
Huge concerns there, understandably. Worries about visa backlogs becoming even worse, the hardship for students. The U.S. Embassy in India also put out advisories about visa compliance, which some people interpreted as adding to the pressure.
So the takeaway from Asia seems to be,
It suggests some key players in Asia are actively trying to capitalize on the perceived instability or unwelcoming climate in the U.S. They're positioning themselves to attract top talent that might now look elsewhere. It could really start to shift where students go.
what about Europe? Any reactions noted there?
From the UK, Professor Simon Marginson, a well-known higher ed expert, was quoted suggesting these U.S. actions could dent America's global prestige, creating opportunities for others, including Europe. The sources also mentioned GRIUN, that's a network of research universities, including European groups like LARU, the Russell Group, German U15. They had actually put out a statement before the Harvard News in early May, stressing collaboration, academic freedom, university autonomy, basically, values they see as potentially under threat from these U.S. moves.
And the significance of that.
It just highlights that European academic leaders are really emphasizing stability and collaboration. If the U.S. looks unpredictable or less committed to academic freedom, Europe could definitely become a more attractive alternative for students and researchers seeking that stability.
Canada seemed to be seeing results already, according to the sources.
Yes, that was quite striking. The sources reported a noticeable jump in applications to top Canadian universities, UBC, Toronto, Waterloo, both from U.S. students looking north and potentially from international students reconsidering the U.S. and looking at Canada instead.
Why Canada specifically?
It's being directly linked to these U.S. policy shifts, the funding cuts, the general anxiety about academic freedom and student rights in the U.S. Canada is often perceived as more welcoming, with more predictable immigration pathways.
So Canada might be benefiting directly from U.S. uncertainty.
That's certainly what the sources suggest. If this perception continues, Canada could see some real sustained growth in attracting global talent that might otherwise have gone to the U.S.
And Australia. Did they react?
Yes, Professor Mark Scott, the head of the University of Sydney, wrote an opinion piece mentioned in the sources. He expressed concern, talked about lessons for Australia, and made that point about global research being interconnected. His line was, "Wounding Harvard wounds research efforts globally."
Okay, pulling all these global reactions together for you, the listener, what's the big picture here?
The big takeaway is that U.S. policy doesn't exist in a bubble. These kinds of actions have real, immediate international consequences. They shake up the global competition for talent. They prompt reactions and strategy shifts from universities and governments worldwide, and they genuinely contribute to a potential reshaping of where students choose to go. The world is definitely watching, and other countries are adjusting their strategies accordingly.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up by digging into the analysis a bit more, looking at motivations, consequences, the outlook. We touched on the administration's stated reasons versus how others interpreted it.
Right. The official DHS line was safety, security, compliance, CCP links. But Harvard and many analysts cited in the sources saw it differently. Retaliation for resisting ideologically rooted demands, or part of a wider cultural battle against institutions perceived as liberal bastions.
And the sources included those quotes from President Trump that seemed to lean into that cultural battle idea.
They did. Things like, "We don't want troublemakers here," or Harvard needing to change its ways. Analysts in the sources connect these statements and the actions to that broader America First stance and a skepticism towards certain international ties or institutions seen as out of step with the administration.
And just to be clear, the sources themselves don't pick a side on which motivation is true.
No, they're careful to present that gap, the difference between the official story and the widespread perception of political motives, as a key fact in itself. That disagreement over the why is a big part of the uncertainty.
So what about the potential long-term damage? What consequences for U.S. higher ed did the sources highlight?
They're potentially really serious. A major one is damage to reputation. The U.S. has long been seen as the top destination, but perceived instability or unwelcoming policies could really tarnish that credibility, and that's hard to win back.
And the economic hit. We mentioned the billions students bring in.
Huge economic impact. International students contribute massively. That figure was around $43.8 billion for 23-24. If enrollment drops significantly, universities face budget crises. That could mean program cuts, job losses, the whole 9 yards.
It also weakens the U.S. talent pool, right? Innovation.
Absolutely critical point. International students are vital, especially in STEM fields. They fuel research, join the workforce. If you hinder that flow, you weaken America's innovative edge, and you might actually end up boosting competitors.
There was also the soft power argument.
Yes, that came up repeatedly in the sources. The idea that alienating talented young people from around the world when they're here risks turning potential future leaders and allies into critics. Lawrence Summers was quoted saying it could even turn them into enemies.
And things like the social media vetting the potential chilling effect on campus.
Yeah, concerns were raised that increased surveillance could lead students and maybe even faculty to self-censor, afraid of saying or researching the wrong thing. That impacts academic freedom directly.
And all this could just speed up those global shifts we saw in the reactions, pushing students elsewhere.
Exactly. Create an environment that feels unstable or unwelcoming, and you risk driving top talent to countries like Canada, the UK, Australia, parts of Asia that are actively promoting themselves as stable, welcoming alternatives.
For you, the listener, why should you care about these potential long-term impacts?
Because they touch fundamental parts of the U.S. The economy, our ability to innovate and lead globally, our diplomatic influence, even the kind of open academic environment we have here. These aren't just abstract policy points. They have real-world consequences for the country's future.
So based on these sources, what's the outlook? What's next for international student mobility?
The sources suggest students themselves will likely become much more focused on risk assessment. It won't just be about academic rankings. Things like policy stability, feeling welcome, knowing the visa process is predictable, those factors will become way more important.
Which could lead to more students going elsewhere.
It could certainly diversify where students choose to go, yes. Spread the talent around more globally.
And U.S. universities, what will they do?
Likely double down on advocacy, fighting against restrictive policies, and definitely increase support services for their international students, helping them navigate all this uncertainty. Plus, those legal challenges, like the Harvard case, will remain really important in defining the boundaries of government power.
So the future is basically uncertain.
According to these sources, very much so. It hinges on legal outcomes, on the nitty-gritty details of policies like social media vetting when they're rolled out, and let's be honest, on the broader political climate, including future elections.
It really sounds like we might be seeing a fundamental shift, maybe, in what students prioritize globally.
The sources strongly suggest that possibility. That maybe we're moving from a world where it was all about academic reputation to one where policy stability and a truly welcoming environment become just as, if not more, critical for attracting the world's best and brightest.
Okay, wow. That was a lot to unpack. Let's just quickly recap the main takeaways from this deep dive.
Sure. We looked at that unprecedented DHS action against Harvard's immediate lawsuit, the TRO, then the broader State Department visa interview, pause, and the plans for much wider social media vetting. We covered the strong negative reactions from U.S. higher ed leaders and the mixed, sometimes opportunistic reactions from around the world, hinting at shifts in where students might go.
Right.
And we discussed the competing narratives on why this happened, the stated reasons versus perceived political motives, and the potentially serious long-term consequences for the U.S. economy, innovation, and global standing.
Okay. So for you, listening now, maybe you're an international student, maybe you know one, maybe you just want to stay informed. What are the key practical points from the sources?
Stay informed, meticulously informed. That's number one. Use official channels. Your university's international student office is crucial. Official government sites like DHS and State Department, reputable organizations like NAFSA. Given the vetting plans, be mindful, be aware of your online presence.
And if you have specific questions?
Don't guess. Talk to your university advisors or get qualified immigration legal advice if you have specific worries about your status or application.
And the sources also had points for universities and policymakers.
Yeah, basically highlighting the need for universities to keep advocating for their students and for the value of international exchange, and for policymakers to really weigh the full, long-term consequences of actions that create instability and might deter talent.
This whole situation, it really crystallizes a fundamental tension, doesn't it? Drawing from everything we've heard in the sources.
It really does.
It makes you wonder, which force ultimately wins out in shaping the future of international education here? Is it the administration's stated focus on security and compliance? Or is it those values of academic freedom, open exchange, global collaboration that the universities and so many others are defending?
And perhaps the most pointed question coming out of this moment of disruption is, could this period fundamentally change where the world's top academic talent decides to go in the future? Will they now prioritize places that offer not just academic excellence, but that crucial combination of stability and welcome?
A question we will definitely be watching. Thank you for taking us through this deep dive.
My pleasure. Keep exploring, everyone, and keep learning about these complex issues.